Alright, so welcome to my YouTube. I was gonna type this out, but I just feel like it's better to do a video because with a video it's easier for me to get my words out than typing it, because typing it, like, I'm always going back and changing things, and and it's a lot easier for me to get my words out with a video. So I wanted to talk about where our journey with meningitis kind of began, and his symptoms, and what it kind of started out with, and what actually brought us into the hospital, because I haven't really elaborated on that a whole lot, because it does bring up a lot of anxiety for me, and a lot of emotions and feelings, and just feelings of guilt, and feeling that I could have done more to prevent where it got. But in actuality, it's just like, when I think about his behaviors and what he was exhibiting, it wasn't anything I thought I couldn't handle at home. So rewind 3.5 weeks ago, the beginning of March, Sunday, I think it was March 1st and March 2nd, the first Sunday in March, Bo comes down with this weird fever. It had no other symptoms. He was fine the first half of the day, playing, eating, doing things as normal, and then all of a sudden, around Sunday evening, he gets a fever, of real high fever, spikes, like 101.9. I was like, whoa, what is this? So figured it was teething or a possible ear infection that was coming on, because he had kind of been scratching at his ear a little bit. So I was like, I'll watch it, see what comes of it. Went and got some Tylenol, gave it to him, fever broke. And then Monday morning, he had a little low-grade fever. It was like 99.5, 99.8, really low grade. Gave him some more Tylenol, broke the fever in like 30 minutes. He was also a little bit fussier than he had been, but it wasn't anything that was alarming. It was just, a little fussiness, a little low grade fever. Gave him some Tylenol. He was acting normal after that. We continued our regular day, and he was a little bit more sleepy. So figured it was either a growth spurt, he was teething, or again, I thought it was a possible ear infection. Tuesday comes along, same symptoms, and he only had 1 dose of Tylenol Monday morning, 1 little dose of Tylenol. And the rest of that day, his fever stayed at 98.9, 98.7. So it was like, not really a fever, but you're kind of warm, but not warm enough to need any more Tylenol. Tuesday morning comes along, he gets another fever, 99.9, 100. Give him some more Tylenol, breaks the fever. So like, okay, you've been having this fever, it's not going away, make a doctor's appointment. Made a doctor's appointment for Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. The rest of that Tuesday, he was sleepy, fussy. That was it. And he just wanted to sleep and eat. He was still eating normally. All he wanted to do was nurse, eat, and sleep. So I'm like, okay, you might have an ear infection that's just making you really uncomfortable. So I made a doctor's appointment. As I'm telling this, it's like bringing up all these emotions. So anyway, made a doctor's appointment, and Wednesday morning rolled around. He had another low-grade fever. Gave him the Tylenol. I'm like, okay, we have a doctor's appointment for 8 o'clock this morning. Take to the doctor's appointment. They'll tell me what's going on, and give me something to cure whatever's happening. Take him to the doctor. He's still like super fussy. Like, he's just really uncomfortable. Really doesn't want to be picked up a whole lot. Just wants to lay and be still. And I have personally had an ear infection in my adult life, and I know how uncomfortable it is to move around when you have pain in your ear, and all you want to do is be still and lay down. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's like a double full-blown ear infection and something is wrong. Take him to the doctor. She looks in his right ear. She's like, I don't see any right ear. She said she didn't see any alarming signs. Looked in his left ear. And oh, my stomach is hurting thinking about like all this. It makes my stomach hurt. But anyway, looked in his left ear, and she said it could be an ear infection there, but you know, his ear was so clogged that she couldn't really tell, because it was just like clogged with earwax is what she told me. So I'm just like, okay, then, you know, maybe it's just in there and we can't see it because there's no way we can get in there and like snatch out all the earwax. You have to go to an ENT to do something like that. Like, I don't think they're able to do that at the doctor's office. I asked her, she said we can't do it, we can't stick a Q-tip in his ear, so it just kind of has to drain on its own. So she checked him out, you know, did the whole rubbing of the lymph nodes, and you know, did the whole examination. She tested him for flu, she tested him for strep, and they both came back negative. And she I gave a rundown of all of his symptoms, and she was like, yeah, this sounds like an ear infection. So she prescribed amoxicillin, and the rest of that day he was just like super fussy, not really wanting to do a whole lot but eat and sleep. He was still eating normally. Went home, gave him his dose of amoxicillin, gave him a bath, gave him some more Tylenol, and put him to bed early. And his fever never really spiked above 100 again after, and the Tylenol was breaking his fever. So I would give him Tylenol, it would break his fever, and he would sleep. So he was sleeping and he was still eating. He even ate solids. That Wednesday night he ate some cereal and some carrots. He was still nursing as usual. He drank like 6 ounces of water, so it's like his intake and his output was still very much normal. But he was crying like he was extremely uncomfortable. So I'm thinking, oh, maybe you just like that ear infection in your ear is just really, you know, giving you the blues. Plus I'm thinking he's teething because he had a tooth cutting through. So I'm like, okay, you have all this stuff going on, it's making you real uncomfortable. Put him to bed. Fast forward, this is the worst part for me. Thursday morning, I woke up 4:30 in the morning, typical for me. Woke up and he was still sleeping. And I'm not sure what my day is gonna be that day because I think I had scheduled to work. So I'm like, oh, I might go into work. So I'm pumping, you know, my milk as usual. And he's still sleeping in his right next to me because I let him sleep with me that night because he was feeling so bad. I just figured it would be easier. So he's sleeping next to me, and he's laying like sleeping. And typically he wakes up around 4:30 to eat, but I'm thinking, oh, maybe you're just feeling so bad that you just don't want to be bothered. So I just kind of leave him alone. And I finished pumping at around 5:30, and I check on him and he's still sleeping, which is still really unusual because he typically wakes up to eat, especially by 5:30. And I go and I'm like, okay, you know, I'll just let you kind of wake up on your own. I'm not gonna... He's sleeping next to me and his face was turned away from me, and I wanted to be able to look at him. So I touch him to pick him up and move him, and his body just feels like really weird, like stiff but limp at the same time. But you know, I was kind of alarmed, but you know, he's breathing, so I'm like, you know, I don't know, like I'm just like, that's weird, but I don't freak out about it. So I move him where I can see him, but his head is still turned away from me. So I pick up his head and I turn it so I can see his head, which I turned his head, and his eyes were ajar, kind of like someone who sleeps with their eyes open. And the way his eyes looked is kind of like they were looking at me but not looking at me. And I went to close his eye, and then it opened up again, and so I opened his eye up all the way, and his eye rolled into the back of his head. And immediately I knew he was having a seizure. And so I jump up, turn on the lights, and he's in my arms, and he's just like limp, and his eyes are completely open at this point, and they're rolling into the back of his head. And at this point I freaking out. I go in the living room there, and she's like, oh yeah, something's wrong. So she immediately jumps up, calls 911. I'm running around freaking out, and I lay him down on the couch, and he's just like limp, stiff and limp. And I put my hand in his mouth, and his jaws are like closed tight, and his tongue, because his tongue was kind of sticking out of his mouth. My sister calls 911, and then at that point, please don't flash me. At that point, I'm calling 911 because I'm trying to figure out what the fuck I'm supposed to do while he's seizing. Like, do I put my hand in his mouth? Do I just lay him on his side? And I knew to just lay him on his side because I've taken CPR classes. But, you know, in the moment, you're just like, what the fuck? So, like, I call them, and they're like, don't put anything in his mouth. Just lay him on his side and rub his back. And so that's what we were doing. Eventually, he started breathing normally again. EMT comes, they look at him, and they think that, oh, his seizure's done. Like, he still doesn't look right. And they're like, oh, sometimes when babies are coming out of seizures, they can still look kind of spacey. And I'm like, he doesn't look like he's coming out of it. So they're like, we can take you to the hospital. You can go to the hospital yourself, or you can wait it out. And everyone in the house is like, go in the ambulance. So we go in the ambulance, and through the ride, I'm looking at him, and I'm like, and I asked the EMT, I'm like, is he having a seizure? Because his eyes are still like looking funny. And he's like, no, it doesn't look like he is. And if he's not thrashing or doing any rhythmic motions, then he should be fine. And I was like, okay. And then we get to the hospital, and the admissions nurse, I think, immediately looks at him and knows that he's having a seizure. And right then, like, that's when everything started. Like, they immediately took him back, hooking him up to IVs, trying to figure out what's wrong, asking me 1,000,001 fucking questions. Did he fall? Was he sick? How sick has he been? How long has he been sick? Has he had seizures before? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, no, I don't know. No, he hasn't fallen. And I'm just like, why are y'all asking me all these questions? Like, they ask you so many questions. It's so overwhelming. And then eventually it gets to the point where they are giving a subtle diagnosis of what it could be. And I'm just like, how is that even possible? Like, he, you know, all he had was an ear infection. Like, I don't get it. So how it all started, he had a low-grade fever, fussiness, and fatigue. And then out of nowhere, 3 days later, he had a seizure. And that's what brought us to the hospital. 3 days later, he had a seizure. So I'm going to be posting another video of how we found out that he had brain damage, and what it is specifically, and how it could affect him and things like that. I'm gonna do another video on the ICU stay, and when he had his first seizure for about 15 minutes at the hospital, and when he desatted, and how scary that was, and when he had his first MRI, and you know, everything that came with that. So that's gonna be my next video. So thank you guys so much for your support. I really appreciate it, and I don't know how I would be getting through this if it wasn't for everyone reaching out to me, being there for me, and sending their love and things like that. So